again, a delight for me and a blessing for me to be worshiping with you guys and hanging with you guys. I love every conversation. I wish I could have a conversation with everyone. I try to have conversations with lots of people. So here's what we're talking about in 4 talks. And this is kind of the negative side. I thought if I could make a longer title, I would add to it. We're talking about the bad philosophy behind AI hype, which we really talked about the first time, and then we unpacked how we know it's bad, the second talk, and evolution hype. But we want to do more than just say this is bad philosophy, right? We want to replace it with the truth. So it's also, the main thing is to understand the truth, and to understand the truth, it's important to distinguish it from the untruth, right? So that's why we're doing this. This is Wednesday evening, so now it's going to be the fantastic improbability of Darwin's story. And this is going to look, it's going to look like I'm beating a dead horse, because this is yes, Precious says, yes, you've killed that horse a long time ago. We're going to kill it 5 times over. This will be the 4th time over. And you might say, well, why? Because if you have one argument that something is wrong, then it's wrong. And that's true. There's 2 reasons why I like to have lots of ways to see that something is wrong. One is that it gives you sort of corroboration. If you see there's many ways to show that this is true and this is false, that gives you more confidence that it is true, that this is true and this is false. The other thing is I find that when I'm teaching, different arguments land on different people different ways. And I can think they're all super solid arguments, and they are. I stand behind all of them. But you might hear one of them, it just may not land on you, or maybe you don't get it, and that's fine. Multiplicity of arguments, Scripture does this. It gives you lots of ways to know that Jesus is who he said he was, with the hope that one of them, at least, and maybe 2, land in a way that you go, oh, I think that I get that, and that really, that really works. So I gave the 3, called them simple arguments, but they do require deep thought. The second, losing track of my days, that was Tuesday evening, yesterday evening. I'm going to give you another way to see this today, and another way to see it tomorrow, and then we're done. Okay, I promise, no more ways. So that'll be 5 ways to see this that I hope ends up being a convincing case. And especially tomorrow, it's not just the negative. Tomorrow is going to emphasize, here's actually how you see how God has infused in his creation his glory, okay? So when you see what he has made, it should be a worshipful experience, and that's what we're going to focus on tomorrow morning. Okay, so today, the fantastic improbability of Darwin's story. And don't worry, we're not going to do math probability today. We've already done the math probability, which takes me to Sebastian's question yesterday evening, which it was occurring to me today, I didn't handle it well. He asked, and it's a reasonable question, after we went through all that probability thing, he said, remind me again something like, remind me again of what that was all about, right? Yeah. And I gave a long-winded response. I should have said this. Remember when we looked at this, we asked this question, how likely is it that a physical process operating on a lifeless Earth-like planet would produce a stone whose surface has letter-shaped indentations that form a coherent text hundreds of words long? And we all agreed the probability is essentially 0. There's no way that's going to happen. The whole point of doing that probability thing, I thought there was a hand up. The whole point of doing that probability thing was to show that this truth actually means that it's also impossible for blind physical processes to produce intelligent beings that carve words into stone. Remember, because we said the evolutionist wants to say, well, yes, I agree, that probability is 0, but if you get intelligent beings, life forms that have language and can carve stone, then they will carve words in stone. That's true. But the likelihood of that happening by accidental blind physical processes is as 0 or worse 0 than this 0. Okay, that was the whole point. Okay, and whether that landed well or not, that I should have said it's because of this, to show that this means life can't evolve by accident. And most people would not think that this statement means that, but it does. And we unpacked why it does. Okay, so that's where I was going with the probability argument. The conclusion, remember, from that was this. the special conditions needed for an outcome that is beyond the reach of chance to become probable are themselves beyond the reach of chance. So when we say you're never on a lifeless planet, physics is never going to give you a text on stone, and then someone says, well, what if physics gives you life and intelligent life that uses language that can carve stone, and then it carves a stone? Okay, that's even less likely to happen by accident. Okay, that's what this means. The conditions that you want to give to make this impossibility possible must themselves be impossible. Okay? Of course, we are possible, but we didn't happen by accident. That's the point. We didn't happen by physics. Vincent van Gogh, you may have heard of him, said this, and I like it. He said, great things are not done by impulse, but by a series of small things brought together. And great things are not accidental, but must certainly be willed. Okay? And that fits with something else. I don't think I've given you this quote yet. Alison Gopnik is or was, I'm not sure if she's still active, is a psychology professor at UC Berkeley. And she wrote an article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal that said this: by elementary school age, children start to invoke an ultimate godlike designer to explain the complexity of the world around them, even children brought up as atheists. And she wrote this in an article that's saying this is bad because kids, 4-year-olds, when they see a grasshopper in the backyard, they just intuit that that was made by a godlike designer, even if their parents are atheists and are not talking about God at all. They intuit this. And the article was saying, well, that's bad because when these kids reach the point where we want to educate them on evolution, we now have to undo this idea that they've already got in their mind that's anti-evolution. And so her suggestion was we start educating people preschool age with, pop-up Darwin books, okay? And I disagree with what she's saying, but this observation, don't you agree that this is pretty interesting? That you don't need your parents to be telling you about God. I think Scripture says this, okay? It's obvious. Romans 1. Okay. So what I want to do this evening is kind of unpack what might be happening that allows a 4-year-old to get this. And whatever it is, if a 4-year-old's doing, then it's not going to be complicated. Now, we're going to look at some more complicated things, of course, but I think we're going to land on something that we think is quite simple that might be what's happening in the mind of a 4-year-old that's just obvious, okay? And I want to start with this. When we talk about physical outcomes, so stuff that happens in the physical world, and we want to explain a particular circumstance, something that happens, a physical outcome, we really only have these 3 categories or buckets, if you want, of explanation. A physical outcome happens either by chance or it happens by physics, the laws of physics, or it happens by what I'm going to call craft. And I call this craft and not design intentionally because physics itself is a designed thing, right? The laws of physics, we talked about gravity, the beautifully elegant laws of physics are themselves designed. And if I use the word design here, I don't want to imply that physics isn't designed. So what I mean by craft is reaching into the physical world and doing something with it, okay, that's not in the physics, okay? So whoever made this podium, the podium is structurally sturdy because of physical properties, but physics doesn't explain the podium. It explains why you can have rigid solids, but it doesn't explain the podium. Someone used physical stuff and carved it and sawed it and glued it. That's craft, reaching into the physical world and making something of it. And we know about craft because we do it all the time, right? Does God know about craft? Yes. Because what I want to convince you of is there's this elegant physical structure to the universe, and yes, God did it, but it doesn't explain us, or grasshoppers, or mushrooms, or oak trees. Those are things where God himself crafted. He took the physical structure of the world and put things together that physics would never do on its own, okay? So these are the 3 buckets, and I'm claiming this is all there is. If you see something that happened, a physical outcome, and you want to say, well, how did it happen? What caused it to happen? These are the only 3 buckets you can draw from. If I'm missing anything, tell me what I'm missing. I think this is everything right here, right? And that allows for a powerful way of arguing, because you've heard of a process of elimination. If you only have 3 possibilities and you want to say what caused this, and you can rule out 2 of them, then you've ruled in the one, right? Because that's all there is. It's only these possibilities. And I'm going to give you a rule of thumb for thinking about this. If we want to, for a specific thing, whatever it is, the fire is burning the fire pit, or the fire goes out, so that's a physical outcome, we could say, what is that? What caused that? It's chance, physics, or craft, and it can be a combination of them, but it can only be these things. If chance is the cause, you're saying really that it is a random irregularity. Chance is the cause of things that we would call random irregularities, okay? Like if you have a 10-sided gaming die and you throw it on the ground, it comes up 8. Yes, there's physics in how the dice landed on the floor, but the fact that it came up 8, we ascribe to a random irregularity. It could have been any number, and it happened to be 8. Okay? If physics is the cause, that will be the case for universal regularities, meaning this happens always this way. If you have these circumstances, it always gives this outcome. Okay? So fire's going out. You know, if you have the same circumstances anywhere in the world where you've run out of fuel and the temperature is what it is, the fire will go out. And that's physics. It's a universal regularity. And craft is local arrangements. It's not universal. It's not always the case that wood turns into podiums. It's if someone did something right here or wherever they did it to make this. That's what craft looks like. So random irregularities, universal regularities, and local arrangements. Now I'm going to run through, this becomes easier to get if we run through lots of examples. So AI again. I said, give me a picture of an iPhone with a cracked screen. Boom, there you go. Okay, so here's an iPhone, or at least Gemini thinks it's an iPhone. So let's say, what are we trying to explain here? Because there's lots of things that we could explain. So let's look at this. Here's the circumstance. When this iPhone was dropped, the impact caused cracks, some of which look a bit like a 4 with an R next to it. I'm referring to, do you see the 4 there and the R right there? You see that? You might not see it in the back. Did you just do something? Okay, you see it. Okay. Question. What caused the cracks to have this shape? Okay, now remember, here's the buckets which of these buckets are we going to draw from? When this iPhone was dropped, the cracks form what looks like a 4 and an R. Which of these buckets do we think is a good explanation? Chance. Yeah, I would say chance, because if you want to say physics, you're saying, I mean, if you say it's physics, you're really saying they designed this display so that it says 4R when you drop it. So they put little crack lines in there that don't show up, and then when you drop it, it says 4. So that it could be physics, but that seems very implausible. So we're saying, when we say it's chance, we're saying if you drop a bunch of phones, they won't all have that 4R. This one just did, okay? And we're also saying it's not craft because we don't think that when you dropped the phone, God reached in and made sure that 4R, or we don't think you did something that made 4R show there. So chance is a good explanation for that. What if we're trying to explain something else? So forget about that it's got a cracked screen. When a text was received by this phone, the lock screen was activated showing the time. Okay, so somebody sent a text to this phone, and now it says 2:17 on the display. What caused the time to show when it was activated? If we're talking about what caused what happened right here, not what caused, one of you sent the text. We're not asking what caused you to send the text. We're asking what caused the display to activate when the text was received. You've got these options. When you say craft, you're saying the phone is sitting on the table, and when a text message came in, someone reached in and made the phone display light up. Okay, we'll get to a question where that is the answer. And you could also say craft if you said Liz sent the text. You go by Liz, right? Liz decided to send a text. You could say, well, that's craft because she did something, okay? But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what happened right here that the display lit up. That's physics, right? Okay? And we're not saying that the phone's not designed. We're saying once you've got this design and it's just physical structure here, it will light up when the text comes to it. It's part of the design of the thing. It's the machine works that way. So that's physics. Okay? Now if we ask this question, circumstance. In 2007, the first iPhone came into existence. You all were like a year old, 6 years old, 4 years old. Thank you very much. Everyone show with your fingers. I was not even born at this point. No. What caused the iPhone to come into existence? So we're saying there was a world without iPhones and then there's a world with iPhones. What's the cause of iPhones? Craft. It has to be, right? Physics doesn't make iPhones. Once you make an iPhone, physics is the operation of the iPhone, but someone had to put it together. And someone had to invent it. So that's craft. Okay? We're getting really good at this. Okay. This is it in Taiwan? Yeah, in Taiwan, there's these marble formations that you can go tour. They're beautiful, where wind and water have carved marble mountains and crevices, and you can hike through them. And suppose we're hiking through this national park in Taiwan, and we come around a corner, and we see this. Okay, this is marble. This is marble. Did wind and erosion cause this? Yes, it did. Okay, very good. We're getting really... No, it didn't. And we know that right away. And the 4-year-old knows that right away, right? Because you don't have to know anything about the physical structure of marble or how it erodes. What you know is there's something special going on here. Because this is a chunk of rock. What's special about it? It has the representation... Say so. Who said it? Yeah, Faith. It looks like a person. It's the form of a human being, and it's really quite elegant, the form of a human. Bernini is one of the finest sculptors ever to exist. The fact that you can make what looks like a human in motion, a human form in motion, and it's made out of stone is quite remarkable. So this does not happen by the physics of erosion. This happens by someone reaching in and doing something. So here's the circumstance. Against the backdrop of weathered marble sits a stunning sculpture of the human form. What caused this sculpture? And we would say that's got to come from craft. Someone who knew what they were doing, happens to be a guy named Bernini, Italian sculptor, worked probably for years on marble and brought that beautiful thing about. Okay, I can't see which square is highlighted here. There. Okay. Okay, so here's one last one. I think this is the last one. No, not next to last. Okay, here's like a round target, we'll say, and we drop marbles on the target. There's a marble, and we do this, we'll say, 50 times. And every time we do it, the marble ends up there. So the marble, wait till the marble's done with its bouncing and rolling, and the marble ends up there. And then we pick up the marble, or we do another marble. Every single time, it ends up there. Why? What's the cause?
It's a bowl.
What?
It's a bowl.
Physics. Okay? There's a design, it's not just a pad. That's a top view of a copper half-sphere bottom bowl, and it's just simple physics that when a marble can roll, it's going to roll to the lowest point because of gravity, and it'll do a little jostling around, but it'll always end up at the very, very lowest point, and that's the center, and that's why the marble always ends there. So it's not chance. Chance would never explain why marble always ends up there. It's not craft, because no one's reaching and saying, I want the marble to be here. Now, if we said, why does the bowl have the shape, then it would be craft, because someone had to craft the bowl. But given the bowl and given the spherical marble, this is just physics, right? And there's an interesting thing about appealing to the physics explanation. If you want to say physics is the cause, you should be able to show the physics. And you can for this, because you could do the energy minimization. You remember potential energy and kinetic energy? Did you ever do that? Okay, and you have friction. If there were no friction, what would happen? The marble would just go, right? But there is friction, so you'll end up with the marble at the bottom at the lowest potential energy and zero kinetic energy. There's a beautiful thing about the physics bucket, because if someone wants to say, yeah, physics is the cause of that, then you should say to them, show me how physics does that. And they should be able to at least give you a sketch of how that works. The claim, the show me principle for validating a physical cause is this. The claim that some outcome has a physical cause is properly validated by doing the physics or demonstrating the physics, right? This isn't unreasonable. If someone says physics does this, say, show me the physics. If physics is the cause, then it should be possible to derive that outcome from the principles of physics. And we're not saying you have to have a fully fleshed perfect, but someone needs to be able to show you, here's how the principle of physics do this. Remember when I was talking about the origin of stars and galaxies, and we talked about all these things that are true of physics? That's the sort of argument, and beyond that, that should be brought to bear if someone wants to say physics is the cause. And what's nice about that is if you don't think physics is the cause, or if you're quite certain it's not the cause, and someone says it is the cause, give them the chalk. Say, show me how physics does that, okay? So this really becomes relevant now. Now we've got these three categories. We have some idea of how you use them. Now we want to look at this. You knew we were going here all along. Here's the circumstance. This planet, the third rock from the sun, is teeming with living things that are truly remarkable. So that's the circumstance. And they have, even though we've said we're not just physical, we have physical bodies, and we're saying all the physical aspect of life, even though that's not the totality of life, is itself remarkable. What caused these living marvels to appear? So we're looking for a cause, and we only have three possibilities: chance, physics, and craft. Guess which possibility an atheist does not want to use? Craft, because who did the crafting? So they're going to say, craft is not allowed, so it's going to be chance and physics, okay? These are the only possibilities. Turns out nobody believes that chance is the cause. I already gave you this Richard Dawkins quote, and he's an atheist Darwinist. He said, however many ways there may be of being alive, it is certain that there are vastly more ways of being dead, or rather not alive. You may throw cells together at random over and over again for 1 billion years, and not once will you get a conglomeration that flies or swims or burrows or runs or does anything even badly that could remotely be construed as working to keep itself alive. He's saying, forget about the chance bucket. That doesn't work, right? Now, I think he would say that natural selection falls into the physics bucket, and that maybe a combination of chance and physics. He would definitely not want to go craft, because that's what he's arguing against. He's saying it's the blind watchmaker, it's not the real watchmaker. We already said that there's a problem, though, with this. A total takedown of Darwinism is in this short piece of writing. What is it? 2 sentences from Richard Dawkins. And do you remember what it was? He's saying this is impossible. This will never happen. But the way it will never happen by random forces. What is the force that he thinks does do it, or the cause? Well, he's not from these buckets. He would say natural selection. So he would say natural selection is what causes this thing that would otherwise be impossible to happen. But we said that natural selection only happens once this has happened. So natural selection can't be the cause of this. Natural selection is when you have something that has a superior feature in a population, however it came to be. Natural selection is the process by which that now superior version of the species, of the organism, displaces the other ones, and they all go extinct, and this becomes the new normal, right? That's natural selection. But that doesn't explain how that came to be. It just explains how it succeeds once it did come to be. Do you get that? So in his own writing, this is the end of Darwinism. He didn't think this through. But it's also an admission that chance does not explain life. Likewise, nobody believes that the design of any living thing can be derived from physics, right? Now that's different from saying, when we looked at the iPhone, it operates by physics. So once it's been designed, physics is at work in its operation, and that would be true for living things as well. But we're not talking about the operation. We're talking about the origin. Where did it come from? iPhones did not come from physics, and nobody believes that you can derive from physics the remarkable structures required for any, even the simplest living thing, including a bacterial cell. Okay? And if someone claims to believe this, what do? Give them the chalk. Show me how that works. Okay? Again, AI. Because what are the odds that you can Google, show me a scientist deriving the structure of a dragonfly on a blackboard? Gemini? There it is. Okay. So nobody can do this. Nobody can say, okay, here's physics, here's the compound I, here's how this comes. It all falls out of E equals mc squared, because it doesn't. It doesn't fall out of E equals mc squared. We're not saying that there isn't physics operating in a dragonfly. We're saying you don't get dragonflies from physics. You get dragonflies from craft, someone putting something together in a brilliant way, and then the physics makes it work. But that's the way all of our inventions are. They work by physics, but someone had to be brilliant enough to make the thing, to assemble physical stuff in the right way for it to work. And if they don't assemble in the right way, it doesn't work, okay? So if someone wants to say you can derive dragonflies from physics, give them the chalk. Show me how you do that. They can't. They know they can't. Okay. Therefore, we've eliminated chance and physics. We're left with crafts. That's the only explanation for life. Okay. But how do children intuit this? If we go back to the 4-year-old, if we go back to Alison Gopnik, and she says the kids who are in an atheist family and they see this, this is probably not the way they do it. I don't know how they do it, but I think there's something that must be very simple and intuitive that's happening in a young person's mind. And I think it has to do with spotting clever function, or you could call it high-level function. Things that are doing stuff that's remarkable, that rocks and sand and puddles and snow and hail and stars don't do, as beautiful as those things are as part of the physical universe. They're not like a bee that hovers and finds flowers. There's a high-level function that living things do and non-living things never do. Do you see that? If you look at a tree is doing a remarkable job of extracting energy from sunlight. It's solar cells. The leaves on a tree are solar cells that replace themselves every year on a deciduous tree, and even on the pine tree, the needles are dropping and it's getting new needles. And it's using that energy to build a structure that reaches up into the sky to get more sun, and then it reproduces. It makes seeds that produce more trees. This is remarkable. Pebbles don't do that. Pebbles don't make more pebbles. They don't convert sun energy into chemical energy. So all of this is remarkable. I call high-level functioning things that have a physical structure to them, I call the property that they all have functional coherence. And what I mean by that is illustrated by this diagram. It's a hierarchy of parts within parts, and all of these arrows mean these things are arranged to do this, these are arranged to do this, and these are arranged to do this, and these are arranged to do that. So it's all arranged to perform this high-level top function. So that you could call this an invention, and it could be an oak tree, or it could be a smartphone, or it could be an eye, a compound eye. It's the top thing that has lots of things going on within it, all the way down to elementary constituents. But it would never work unless these things were arranged to support the function the next level up. Do you see that? And this is the brilliance of design. And this could be really complex stuff like smartphones, or it could be a text message. Like you send a sentence on your phone to someone else. The top level thing is like the meaning, as you said, let's meet at this place at this time. Your intent is that top level function, Below that is the words, and below that is ultimately the letters that you use to make the words. Do you see how there's that hierarchy? And you have to know how to use letters to make words, but that's not enough. You have to know how you put words together to make sense. And it goes above from there, from sentences up to paragraphs, up to essays, up to chapters, up to books. We're very familiar with this kind of structure. So functional coherence is this. It's the hierarchical arrangement of parts or aspects or circumstances needed for anything to produce a high-level function, each part contributing, excuse me, in a coordinated way to the whole. And why is it that these things never happen by chance? Well, it's because we've said these can't be anything. They have to be the things that do that, okay? So there's a constraint on all of these things, and those constraints are not apt to be met by chance. And you can show that. So here's a very simple example. Alphabet soup. Do we ever have alphabet soup here? Do we? When was the last time you had alphabet soup? Okay, so when you pour a bowl, or when you've got a bowl of alphabet soup in front of you, whenever that was, when you were sick as a kid, what do? You either look for words in it, right, or you make words out of it, right? And you can find, you can find little words here, like, you can find like 3-letter words like may over there, M-A-Y, but you have to do the work for it. Do you see rose here? R-O-S-E. But we don't go, oh, that's spooky. There's words in my soup. Because we had to do the work. They're messy. Oh, wait a minute. Holy. That is spooky. No. This is coincidence, right? Because we're doing all the work, okay? This is coincidence. But if you took the lid off your alphabet soup and it said this, then you go, no. Somebody's doing something with my soup here. And this is not this is nothing like a compound eye or a tree or a dragonfly. This is very, very simple. But you know, if you saw this, that it didn't just happen by somebody pouring soup. Somebody had to fiddle with the soup to do this. Is there a way you can show that? And the 4-year-old would know that, right? If the 4-year-old saw that, they go, "Hey, mommy, you've been messing, or brother or sister, you've been messing with my soup." What does that say anyway? No. Here's how you can actually show this. And the 4-year-old wouldn't do this, but we can do it. You can put a grid over this, and the grid squares are the size of the pasta letters. And there's sometimes 3, 21, 23 of these squares in this grid, and there's something exceptional about what's going on in each of these squares. The outer squares are cleared of letters, and the inner 5 squares have letters arranged, and it's not just that they're arranged in the correct orientation, they actually spell a word. And actually the word has something to do with the alphabet soup because they're made of pasta, right? Okay, so what is the likelihood if you just pour alphabet soup into bowls that you'll get a circumstance like this? You can do simple math. Anybody have the number on the top of their head? No. You can do, it's very close to 0. Here's the way you can calculate it, roughly. What you're saying is, how special is each of these cleared squares? And by that you mean, if we put the grid over the whole bowl, how many squares would we have to look at to find something that's cleared? Let's say it's 1 in 10 special. I think it's maybe more special than that. How special are the ones that have the letters P-A-S-T-A? Well, they're more special than that because they have a letter in the right orientation, and a letter that spells something, okay? So those are maybe 1 in 100 special. So you can do this calculation. 18 squares are 1 in 10 special. 5 squares are 1 in 100 special. Are you following this? Okay? And then you do the math from there, and the math looks like this. The whole pattern is 1 in 10 to the 18th times 100 to the 5th special. Okay? Quick mental math. 1 in 10 octillion. You would have to pour 10 octillion bowls of alphabet soup, and I guarantee you will never do that, to get this. So more than the ocean, more than the Pacific Ocean, like 100 million times the Pacific Ocean of alphabet soup poured out in bowls, then you might get this once, but nobody's ever going to do that. And that's not a very remarkable design. We're talking about a 5-letter word in soup, okay? So look at these other things. So maybe the 4-year-old, again, the 4-year-old's not going to analyze it that way, but I think the 4-year-old sees, oh, that does something. And in a way that a mud puddle doesn't do something or a rock doesn't do something. And you could say, well, a star does something, and the sun does something, and the moon does something, but what they do is give off light, and is how close is light to what's on the periodic table? Well, it turns out it's pretty close, because if you get electrons that go from a high state to a low state, they give off photons, and photons is light. But what about something that you point at something and you press a button and it gives an image of what you pointed at on the back screen? That's a high-level function. That's doing something clever. And you wouldn't have to take this apart to know that it has to have structure in it, but it does. And if that's true of things like digital camera, then how much more true is it going to be of things like this? Okay? And might it be that the 4-year-old doesn't have to, hopefully, dissect the butterfly or the cat to see that it's got a lot of complexity in it? The 4-year-old can simply say, that's doing something clever. The dragonfly is hovering like a helicopter, and it moves around like it's wanting to do something, and that's not something that smoke and sand do. Okay? So, is it true? And by the way, this hierarchy, this is a joke. I'm just showing you that it's this kind of a thing, but if we looked at the human body, you'd have a massive wall with 1 million things on it to show the nested hierarchy of complexity in the human body. And that's going to be true of all complex life, not as deeply true of the bacterial cell, but true of that as well. So where were we? We're here. So what I'm going to do is go down this hierarchy and give you an idea. So this is our biology. I'm a biologist, okay? And at last, we're talking about biology. I should say something about biology. So here are most of the major organs of the human body arranged out. The largest organ happens to be missing. The skin. Who? The skin is missing. I just think that would look gross, and so they said, we're not going to do it. And if we take any one of these organs, so this is like the top level circle is human body, okay? And is human body the whole thing of a human? We've already said, are we just a body? No. We're mind, soul, spirit knit to a physical body. So now we're just looking down. So it's mind, soul, spirit. We're just going down the body branch. So the top level thing is human body, living human body. Under that is all these organs that have to do what they do in order for the human body to do what it's supposed to do. And we could look at any one of these organs and see tissue level complexity. So here's an eye showing you the cornea, the retina, the sclera, the vasculature, all these things that have to have their special properties in their special orientation in order for an eye, the human eye in this case, to do what it's supposed to do, which is focus light incoming through the lens on the retina and produce an electrical signal that goes through the optic nerve out the back of the eye to the visual processing center in the brain, right? So this doesn't work unless all these things are there. We could look at any one of these tissues and see at the tissue level extraordinary cellular complexity. All these things have to be arranged just so in order for the tissue to do what it's supposed to do, for the organ to do what it's supposed to do, for the body to do what it's supposed to do, for the human to do what it's supposed to do. So this is a little piece of retina. You've heard of the rod and cone cells. That's what these are. And that the rod and cone is referring to, see how that's cone-shaped and that's rod-shaped? They're the different cells in the retinal tissue. And you see how remarkably complex these single cells are and how complex and elegant the arrangement of them is in order for the retina to do what it's supposed to do. Now this is an art, this is not AI, this was pre-AI, I paid for this one, that's what I'm trying to say. This is an artist's rendition of a generic animal cell. The interesting thing is there's no such thing as a generic animal cell. They're all specialized, or you've heard of stem cells. So a stem cell is a very special cell that can go in different directions. But what this does a good job of indicating is the sort of city-like complexity of the inside of a single cell. And if you've taken biology, you can probably name some of these things, but we don't need to do that. You don't need to know exactly what you're looking at. We can be the 4-year-olds right now and just look at it and say, wow, that looks really remarkable and complex. And it has to have these parts in order for it to do what it does. Now you can go all the way down below the cell level. I don't have this shown, would be the organelle level. So somebody's going to know what that is, right? A mitochondrion, which is one of the organelles. You have the, what? The powerhouse of the cell. Mike, why are you saying that? Why are you laughing? Because I know why I laugh when you.
Because we all have been.
I have a colleague, Dr. Jason Tresser, in my department who teaches cell and molecular, and he hates that thing. So we all go, whenever someone mentions mitochondria, we go, powerhouse of the cell. And he goes, stop saying it. Because he thinks that's not the complete story of the mitochondria. That's fine. I don't get irritated by that. So when I say mitochondrion, you can all say powerhouse of the cell. That's one organelle. There's lots of organelles. You have the endoplasmic reticulum, you have the Golgi apparatus, you have the nucleus. So this is a membrane that encloses, what's on the inside of the nucleus? What does the nucleus enclose? What's on the inside of the nucleus? No guesses? Double helix? Your DNA, your whole, all your chromosomes are inside the nucleus. Did anybody say that? I didn't hear it. You have to shout. Okay, so all of those have their complex structures, and they have to do their special functions for a cell to do what it's supposed to do. And you can drill down lower than that to the molecular level. So this is the most sophisticated enzyme, and an enzyme is a protein that does a chemical reaction. Not necessarily just protein. This has a lot of protein in it, but it also has RNA in it. Anybody know what this beast is? This is the largest. Anybody know what it is? There's an enzyme that's responsible for reading along an RNA chain and assembling amino acids into protein chains. And it's on the tip of your tongue. Yeah. Ribosome. This is the ribosome. It's called a nucleoprotein because it has lots and lots of protein pieces, but it also has RNA in it. And it's basically a factory at the molecular level. And this has its own parts, so we could break up the ribosome into its parts. Do you see how we can keep going all the way down? And you can keep going down and down and down. And it's all very sophisticated. And life depends on this whole structure, this whole glorious structure. So proteins are what took me, well, the Lord took me to Cambridge to study proteins. And the specific question I was addressing is, okay, these are chains of amino acids that fold into elegant structures that have been cataloged now by about 100,000 of these. Very different structures. And it's the structures that enable them to do the job that they do. They can be parts of a motor. They can be parts of a big enzyme like this. They could be a small enzyme that's a single chain molecule that folds into a structure and does chemistry. So all the chemistry of life is done by these things, by the enzymes, but they do more than chemistry. So if you have like in the nuclear pore complex, if you have myosin chains, like your muscle contraction involves chains and proteins that are pulling things along chains. Well, the chain is a protein, and the motor that's burning ATP and pulling things along the chain for muscle contraction is also a protein. Bless you. So the Lord gave me an opportunity to ask the question, how hard is it to get amino acids to come together into a chain that has the right sequence properties to do something like this? And the reason I thought that was a good question is you can easily build a system where you can mess these up and see if they still work. And I thought, well, that's how you find out basically how much information there is in a gene, because a gene is the DNA sequence that tells the ribosome how to make the protein sequence. So what you do is you monkey with a gene that makes a particular enzyme, and you throw millions of these messed up genes into bacterial cells. This is what I did. And you put the bacterial cells on Petri dishes and see which ones still work, even though they've been messed up. And the gene I used is a gene for, this is genetic code I'm telling you about. It's a gene for this protein, and it's called beta-lactamase. And beta-lactamase is an enzyme that is clinically bad for us because you're aware of this. What was the first antibiotic that humans used clinically? Penicillin. And has anyone had a prescription for benzyl penicillin? For penicillin. Now, you might have had amoxicillin, you've had ampicillin, you've had some cillins. Have you ever had a prescription for penicillin? You have. It's very rare. Why do you think it's rare? You've heard about this, that penicillin used to work and it doesn't work as well anymore. It's rare to use it in a clinical setting. Why is that? You've heard about this. Because there's so many bacteria that are immune to it. They're immune to it because they have this. This is a little chemical machine that hydrolyzes, it breaks penicillin. So the green thing there is penicillin, and this is a very efficient enzyme at destroying penicillin. So if a bacterial cell has the gene to make this, you can take all the penicillin you want. Your infection is not going to touch it because it's destroying the penicillin as fast as you can take the penicillin. So bad enzyme for us, but a great enzyme for doing this test, because I could mess this up, mess the gene for this up, and put millions of messed up genes into bacterial cells and put them on Petri dishes with a little bit of penicillin. And if they grow and form a colony, that means this is working. And if they don't, it means this isn't working. So it's a way that I could score the fraction of these messed up genes that still produces a version of this that works, and actually get a number for how hard is it to get this to work, given that you've messed it up. Now, I couldn't do this by messing the entire, do I have a picture of this? I don't think I do. If I messed the whole thing up, then nothing would work. So what I did is I messed up 10 amino acid positions at a time, shuffled them, and then I did it here, and then I did it here, and then I did it here. So leaving it mostly intact, and then messing up a little region, and then scoring the fraction of those locally messed up versions of the enzyme and getting a number, like 1 in 100,000. That's one of the numbers I got. One of the places where I messed them up, I didn't get any that worked. Another one would be 1 in 200,000 worked. What you can do then is do a estimate of, well, what if we did mess up the whole thing, and you really basically are multiplying these fractions, and that's why I couldn't mess up the whole thing. So if you multiply 1 in 100,000 by 1 in 200,000, by those sorts of numbers across this whole thing, then it's 1 in a bajillion. You'd never get it. It'd be like your alphabet soup. But you can measure it locally. And that allows you to get a number. And that number was published in this paper in 2004. I think I mentioned, whoa! Didn't mean to do that. But I don't need this anyway. Yeah, that's gravity for you. It was not craft. Could have been chance. Not intentionally. Okay, so I think I mentioned getting fired, right? I got fired when I was doing this project, and I didn't have the data, and the Lord just opened the door for me to go to. I told you about, he opened up a door for me to go to the center where they did cloned the Dolly sheep, and that's where I actually finished this work. And I wrote this paper, sent it off to JMB, Journal of Molecular Biology, and it came out. And this paper puts a number on, I don't know if you can see it here, it puts a number on the likelihood of a randomly assembled chain of amino acids having these properties that would fold and perform a function, specifically that beta-lactamase function. And the number it reports is 1 in 10 to the 77th power. So that's 1 in 100,000 trillion, 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 which is not good. That's a very low probability. And I thought when I submitted the paper that when people see a number like that, they would realize what I realized, which is Darwin's theory doesn't work at all. You can't get a single gene from this, much less these higher level things that I saw. And that didn't happen. It went through peer review and it got published because it was a very solid piece of work. But people pretty much ignored the result because they just didn't know, they didn't want to deal with it. Okay, so evolution goes on. Let me give you sort of a feel for, because 1 in 10 to the 77th power doesn't really mean, numbers like that don't really mean anything to us. But I like to think of these things, if we're talking about chance, the likelihood of chance hitting a target that's 1 part in 10 to the 77, a 1 in 10 to the 77 power target. So go back to our blind archer and you have this target. Well, let's say there's a dart that gets blindly thrown and has to hit a target on a large wall. How large is the wall and how small is the target? Well, for it to be 1 in 10 to the 77th power, the target would be the size of a hydrogen atom, and the wall would be the size of a sphere that encloses the visible universe. That's not going to happen, my friends. That is not going to happen. So I coined this term that I use in the book, fantastically improbable. And it means so improbable as to be exceedingly unlikely to happen by chance at any time or place in the universe. And the reason this is important is if you just say that something has a low probability, then people will say, well, what if you have 5 billion years? Or, well, what if there's a trillion planets that each have 5 billion years? Once you reach a certain level of improbability, it doesn't matter. This isn't a big enough universe for this to happen by chance, okay? It doesn't matter. And then people could go with a multiverse, but I've already given you arguments that show how even that doesn't solve the problem. I can mention that again in a second. But here's the conclusion. To hit a fantastically improbable target by accident is, in effect, physically impossible. This physical universe, even if you accept, when I make arguments like this, I'm not challenging the age of the universe. Let it be 15 billion years. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying let it be. That doesn't solve this problem. Okay? Let it be as huge as it is and as old as it is. That does not solve this problem because we're talking about fantastic improbabilities. Therefore, for life to have happened by accident, remember, I looked at one little protein. Think of all the things that we looked at like in the human body. That's nothing. You need tens of thousands of proteins and way more beyond that to build a body. Okay? And if one protein can't happen by chance, then none of this can happen by chance, not even a bacterial cell. Therefore, for life to have happened by accident is, in effect, physically impossible. Okay, now, so we've come to this conclusion. Now, it agrees totally with what we came to with this, right? In a very different way. Here I just asked the question, what's the likelihood on a lifeless planet? And everyone says it's impossible. And I'm saying you can do the probability argument to show that if it's impossible for that to happen by chance on a lifeless planet, then it's impossible for the circumstances that would make it happen to happen. So you can't get evolution of intelligent life. And all of this is surpassed by, so if we say that both of these are two ways to come to the conclusion that accidental life is so improbable we should consider it to be, the probability to be essentially zero, but not mathematically zero. Whereas this argument says it's categorically impossible for physical processes to produce us. Why? Categorically, meaning zero. It's utterly impossible. Because we're not just physical, okay? So there is no physical process to produce something that isn't physical. And there's an aspect of us, an important aspect of us that isn't physical. So we have lots of different ways we come to the same conclusion, and they all seem to coalesce, and they give you different aspects of it. And there's more beyond this, way more beyond this. I'll give you another way of doing this that might be closer to what the 4-year-old does. We're just going to ooh and ah tomorrow at look at what God has done, okay? And that's another way to come to the same conclusion. But I want to end with Scripture. All of this, I think, accords with how God describes us. And remember the Job passage, did you do Job? There's Job on the board in there. Were you studying Job? But in 38 and 39, when God is like, let me show you this. Let me show you this. Have you thought about this? Have you seen this? Do you know how this works? Do you know how this works? Okay? He's saying all of this stuff is extraordinary. You don't understand any of it. And that was true of Job. It's true today of your top scientists. They think they understand, but they don't. Okay? I praise you. This is from Psalm 139. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. Okay? I will end with that. And I can take some questions. I don't want to keep you from the ice, but we can take, let's limit it to 75 questions. No. Riley.
This is kind of off topic, but do you know if carbon dating is accurate?
Carbon dating can be accurate, but so the way carbon dating, it has assumptions built into it. So my one sort of complaint about radio dating, which is not just carbon dating, there's lots of different ways they do this, is they'll just tell you this is how old this is, and they don't talk about the assumptions that go into it. So carbon dating works by this assumption that nitrogen is N14. So nitrogen has 7 protons, 7 electrons in its nucleus, and the atmosphere is about 79% nitrogen, 21% oxygen. But gamma rays are hitting, the sun's radiation is bombarding the atmosphere. And occasionally that causes, am I right about this? That causes a nitrogen 14 to become a carbon 14. It's a nuclear reaction, but it happens from the bombardment. So some of the CO2 in the atmosphere, because of the sun's radiation, is carbon 14 CO2. Normal carbon is carbon 12. Carbon 14 is radioactive. So the idea is that plants that are photosynthesizing are going to have a higher level of carbon 14 in them because they're getting their carbon from the atmosphere than the general Earth's crust carbon, which is mostly carbon 12. Carbon 12 is the dominant isotope of carbon. Carbon 14 is enriched in the atmosphere because of this effect. And so once you've got carbon 14 brought into life by photosynthesis, it's sort of a clock because it's decaying and losing a proton and becoming, what does it become? I don't remember what it becomes, but it decays. Carbon 14 decays with a half-life of, look it up on your phone, something like 8,000 years or something like that. Look it up on your phone. Somebody. Half-life, oh, you can't. Carbon 14, a few thousand years. Do you know it? Okay, so let's say it's 4,000 years. How'd you do that? Okay, 5,000 years. That's the half-life of carbon 14, which means if you've got a gram of carbon 14 today, in 5,000 years, and you have your Geiger counter, it's going, in 5,000 years, you'll have half a gram of carbon 14, and the rest of it will have decayed away to, I can't remember what it is, oxygen or something. And then in another 5,000 years, you'll have a quarter of a gram, and another 5,000 years, you'll have an eighth of a gram. So the way carbon dating works is they look at how much carbon 14 is in a fossilized remain of something that was alive a long time ago. And by looking at how much depletion of carbon 14 there is, they estimate the clock, how long was this depleting in order for the carbon 14 level to get to what it is in this sample of a woolly mammoth tusk or something, okay? But the assumptions that go into that, I don't know how accurate the chemistry is. I think you can get different datings if you gave the same sample of the tusk to 2 different labs. They might come up with something that's very different. The other thing about carbon 14 is because it's 5,000 years, you can only go so far, like 50,000 years, 80,000 years, and then there won't be any, you won't have enough left to say anything. So carbon 14 doesn't take you back very far. It takes you back many tens of thousands, but not hundreds of thousands, certainly not millions of years. So when people want to say something about deep history, they're using different arguments and different radioactive compounds to say that something is like 100 million years old or half a billion years old, which is when they say the Cambrian explosion happened. So that's the gist of it. So my one peeve about it is everyone gives you just the date, and they don't tell you how many assumptions went into that date, and that's a little bit dishonest, I think. Dakota.
Could you go back to the functional coherence definition, please?
Yeah. Where is that? There it is. Oh, yeah.
So do you believe in an older Earth or an older Earth?
Don't ask me that. No. I think I told you that I don't declare myself to be an old Earth. I'm a creationist. I don't declare myself to be either young or old. When I write papers, like when I make arguments, I just take the standard time frame because I'm arguing to people who think the universe is 15 billion years old and Earth and life is close to 5 billion years old. And I don't want to argue about that. I'll say, I'll take your numbers and show you that this doesn't work. Okay? I'm very open to either. So I know and respect biblical scholars who think that the Genesis account doesn't require 24-hour days. I know and respect people who think it does. When I read it, but I'm not a Hebrew scholar, you notice that the great light and the lesser light for giving the times and the seasons appears on day 4. So it seems to me that there's an indication in the passage that the 24-hour interpretation of sunrise, sunset, sunrise, comes in on day 4, which suggests to me, well, what was day 1, 2, and 3? It suggests to me that it may not be 24-hour days, but there might be someone who knows a lot more about the Old Testament than I do who says, actually, that's not the way to interpret it. The big thing that I would say is there isn't something crucial at stake in that. So I don't want Christians, and I don't like it when pastors say, if the earth is older than whatever they say, 6,000 years old, then Scripture's lying to us, we might as well chuck the whole thing. I think that's just really reckless because it could be, well, here's another way that I argue. But you get a beautiful view of the stars here, which in LA I don't get. So just walking between my little cabin and here, I'm looking up at the sky and you see the stars. Something you can see in the night sky, you don't need a telescope. It looks like about the size of the moon. It subtends about the same arc as the moon, a little bit more, is called Andromeda. And Andromeda was called the nebula before we had good enough telescopes to see that it's actually a spiral galaxy. So it's our neighboring spiral galaxy. We're in the Milky Way, and Andromeda you can see out there in the sky. And you can do a very back of the envelope, simple, no-nonsense calculation to calculate how far away Andromeda is from us. And the only assumption you use for that is that thing up there the same kind of thing that we're in the Milky Way? And by that I mean, you can see the Milky Way, you know what that is? The Milky Way is the band across the sky. It's our spiral galaxy, and you see it as a band across the night sky. And if you assume, okay, Andromeda is another one of these that we're in, then you can ask, well, how far, what's the average interstellar nearest neighbor distance in our galaxy? And just suppose it's similar in that galaxy. Well, Alpha Centauri is our nearest neighbor star. Anybody know how far away Alpha Centauri is? It's 4 light years away. That's our nearest neighbor. So if you take roughly a 4 light year nearest neighbor calculation, there's 1 trillion stars in Andromeda. You can calculate the size of Andromeda, and by the arc it subtends from our view, you can calculate how far away it is. So none of this is weird. None of this involves relativity or anything. And that calculation tells you it's 2 million light years away. Okay, so that means the simplest interpretation of that is it's been there for more than 2 million years because we see the light that it produced 2 million years ago. That's what it means to be 2 million light years away. Now, could there be another interpretation? And someone might say, well, God put all these galaxies out there that are, 1 billion light years away. but he also put the light there between us and them. That's possible. That's not the simplest interpretation, because in the normal way things work, light, you see light because it traveled from the source to the observer. And so if you just use that simple interpretation, Andromeda has been there for at least 2 million years old, and it's the closest galaxy, which means the universe is way older than 2 million years. Now, if someone wants to argue that the simplest interpretation of Scripture says that the universe is under, I don't know what they would say, 8,000 or 10,000 years. I don't know what the young Earth number is, but it's something like that. Then all I say is, look, these are both given to us by God. One is special revelation, one's general revelation. God doesn't lie, so one of these is true. And if you're saying that the simplest interpretation of Scripture is that the universe is young, like on the order of 10,000 years, and I'm saying the simplest interpretation of the night sky is that it's old, then all that means is it's not that simple. One or both is not that simple. But I don't think we should get too worried about it, because, again, I go back to that Luke passage where John the Baptist sends his disciples to Jesus saying, "Are you the one?" And Jesus could have cleared up his confusion, but he doesn't. He doesn't try to clear up his confusion. He says, just go back and tell him, look at this. Okay, so that's what I would recommend. Reese and then Derek.
What's your opinion on dinosaurs?
They're like birds. They don't exist. No. Dinosaurs are real. Well, so there's like what? Like, okay, so by the young Earth view, it seems problematic that there isn't a human record of dinosaurs. So a young Earth creationist view would say, well, dinosaurs would have been created on day 5, I think it is. Humans on day 6, or maybe it's day 6. Animals, are they day 5 or 6? So there should have been humans with dinosaurs before dinosaurs went extinct, but there's no human record. There's no convincing human record of humans having coexisted with dinosaurs. So that seems problematic. But if you allow the yom to not be 24-hour days, it seems to me you could have a passage of a lot of time between the start of creation and the completion of creation. And all of those stages are true, and God did them, but it could be quite a bit of time that passes between the different stages. So then you have the death thing, which is also, so death, according to Scripture, becomes a judgment in Genesis 3. So could dinosaurs have died before Adam and Eve sinned? And here again, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but I would observe a couple of things. It's possible that because you have a garden account in 1 and 2, and then expulsion from the garden in 3, it's possible that some of the things that are stated in 1 and 2 are special conditions of a garden that is a protected environment for God's special creation, which is the only creatures he made in his own image. That's us. And that expulsion from the garden is a consequence of the sin described in Genesis 3. And it's possible that something else was going on outside the garden. And I also notice that there appears to have been a fall, an angelic fall, before the human fall. Because I know you've heard from someone who doesn't think the serpent in Genesis 3 is Satan. I think it is Satan. But in any case, you have a fall, you have rebellion against God before Adam and Eve rebel against God. And that's represented by the serpent in Genesis 3. So are there consequences of an angelic fall for the created order outside the garden? And then the humans are expelled from the garden and told not to come back to the garden and protected from coming back in the garden? I don't know. But I also think, going back to my Luke thing, I don't think we have to solve all these things perfectly. The big question that Jesus reminded John of is, do you know what you need to know that I'm the one? And the answer is yes. Yeah. Derek. You are?
In Genesis,
Oh.
no, you are.
Oh.
The creation account goes, let there be light, and then there's light. Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters. So the waters under heaven be gathered in one place, and let light appear. Let the earth and vegetation sprout, plants yielding seed, fruit trees bearing fruit, which is their seed, and anyways, trees and stuff like that. And then finally, there's day and night, where there's
That's day 4, right? Yeah.
there's plants before the sun and the earth.
Yes. Now, I've heard accounts. I'm not going to plonk down on something, so I don't feel a burden to exactly tie this to science. So I go back to the Luke thing. But I've heard one account, actually Hugh Ross, are you familiar with Hugh Ross, who's an old earth creationist? He thinks that the day 4 appearance of the great light and lesser light is, if you go back before this, you have, even before day 1, you have the Spirit. Read it. What verse is it like? Verse 3, the Spirit was hovering over the water. It's like verse 3, I think. Verse 2. Read it.
The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water.
Okay, so is that a clue that the perspective we're going to get is surface? Here's what the surface of the earth looks like, okay? It's saying the Spirit is hovering. It's not saying God's not everywhere. It's saying, I'm talking about here, because this is where I'm going to do something special. And is it possible that you have a very dense vapor atmosphere that's so dense that no light gets through, and you have a dark surface? And then the separation of the waters to the water below and water above is condensation of dense water vapor to form the bodies of water and the clouds, and the clarification of the atmosphere as you lose water from the atmosphere. So you have a very hot earth that's got all this water. You'd expect there to be so much water vapor that you would not even see the sun at all. It'd be totally dark on the surface. And it could take a long time for clarification of the atmosphere and the separation that it talks about, the waters above and the waters below. And it's possible that day 4 is saying, oh, now there's light. Now you can actually see these lights in a clear sky. Now you could have plants before that as long as you're getting light. So plants will grow fine in diffuse light. But, so you can imagine on the surface there might have been no place where you can actually see the sun and see the moon, like there's the circle and there's the circle, but you start to get a light gray sky, and you could have photosynthesis at that point. I don't know, though. I don't know. Yeah. There's a lot of people have done a lot of careful thinking, and I'm not one of them, but I've read some of them. Sea bass.
How did God create light if the sun was created on the 4th day?
Well, let there be light. So, again, if you take this interpretation, and I'm not committed to it, when it says the Spirit was hovering over the waters. Well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then the Spirit's hovering over the waters. So is it saying, boom, Big Bang, galaxies, planets, all this stuff is occurring. Light, when you have stars, galaxies, that's all light. But now I'm taking you down here, and it's dark here, and it's chaotic here, because you haven't had clarification of an atmosphere, you haven't had separation of water into bodies of water and dry land. And all that is the work that I'm talking about now. So I like this idea that it's not meant to be a full account of, you don't get galaxy formation, you don't get black holes, you don't get all these things that we think are part of it. And that's not, Scripture doesn't need that. It's saying, I did this, and now I'm going to take you here. And I'm going to talk about Earth, because everything special that I have planned for this whole thing is going to happen here on the surface of the Earth. So I don't think it's problematic. You have light as soon as you have stars, and that's early. And then you get planets after you have a couple of star cycles. Because did you know that stars are element generators? They're nuclear reactors, because you start off with just hydrogen, okay? And you have to go through star cycles for stars to convert hydrogen into heavy elements. And then they explode, and they spew all these heavy elements, and then you start to get planet formation. So you have to go through some star cycles in order to have the heavy elements that make a planet, like iron and aluminum and carbon and nitrogen, oxygen. All those are needed for life. So it all fits. The other thing I would say is, so is it possible that that the universe, that there's a true sense in which it did happen in 6 days, and there's a true sense in which it happened in 15 billion years? I think there is. So I do, my computational biology team, we do simulations of evolution in bacterial populations where we don't skip any step. So you go through the whole progression of evolution of these bacterial populations for like, we'll say 10 million years of evolution. And we haven't skipped any step. It's all there. It all happened. And it ran on a computer in 2 hours. Is that 2 hours, or is it 10 million years? It's both. Depends on which way you want to talk about it, okay? It took me 2 hours to do it on my computer, but what I did was 10 million years of history, okay? So how long do you think it takes God, if this is like a mathematical unfolding, how long does it take God to solve a hard math problem? He could do it while he's drinking his coffee. He could do it instantly, okay? It's not a challenge for him. But could it be that the whole unfolding is the full history of 15 billion years, and he dwelled on it luxuriously because he could do it in an instant, but he took a day to do it, right? Then you have the full history of 15 billion years of physics that happened in a day, and he could have done it in a second, but he decided, I'm going to take a day. I'm going to take my time with this. I'm going to enjoy it, right? So I'm not worried about this at all, because I think there are it's going to all turn out to be true, and there's going to be a way that it's true, and it's going to be fully reconciled, and there's nothing deceptive in Scripture, but that doesn't mean that we all understand it, and I want to be humble about my interpretation. So this I may not have this right, but I want to convince you we shouldn't worry about it, because there's lots of ways it can all come together, and I don't know exactly which one. Yeah? Does that sound good? Faith.
So, all of these explanations and arguments are really fantastic and all.
But I feel a but coming along.
Yeah, until people are like, well, I don't care.
Wait, say that again?
Until someone's like, well, I don't care. I don't want to believe in God. So,
Oh, yeah.
in that case, just like a don't throw your pearls before swine sort of kind of thing? Or is it like a, you know?
Did I say, was it in there, or was it? Remember I said, in my view, the first correct understanding of apologetics is self-apologetics, okay? So when your heart is going into doubt and dark places, this is in the Psalms. When David's heart is going, you can read these Psalms, Psalm 77, there's these beautiful Psalms where, God, where are you? I cry out day and night and you don't hear me. And then it says, but you're the one who led us out of Egypt. You're the one who did this. You're the one who provided manna. And what's happening there is the heart goes to a dark place, and the head mind, not the brain, the mind says, hang on, that can't be true. He can't have abandoned me, because look at history. Look at what's happened. And that's your own mind, I'll say head as a metaphor for mind, ministering to your own heart. And that's the most important version of apologetics, okay? You're going to use that more than you're going to talk to your friends, okay? So telling yourself what's true when you're tempted to doubt it is the most important apologetic that you have to master. When you're good at that, and you've done it lots of times, and you have a friend who's doubting, who's a believer, you're going to minister to your friend using that same apologetic. You say, I've been there. I know what you're feeling because I've been there. Here's what helped me. When you have an unbelieving friend,
Then it's not really an apologetic.
Well, there's unbelievers are in different stages of, they're like, I don't even want to see a Christian. I don't even want to talk to someone who knows a Christian. And they're the Tom Nagel kind where I believe so much of what you believe, but for some reason I don't want to take that last step. So you just have to be sensitive to where are you on this progression. Your most powerful apologetic to any unbeliever, I think, is your testimony. Because in your testimony, you're not trying to make an argument. Because if you have a snarky atheist who doesn't want to believe your arguments for God, then they'll just not want to believe your arguments for God. And nothing, you won't be able to change that. But you can pray for your snarky atheist friend. And what they won't be able to reject is your account of what has happened in you. Now, they might say you're misinterpreting it, or I don't think God did that. But when you say, no, this happened to me, you're giving something powerful. When you say, this happened to me, and people see that. And don't worry about the fact that in that face-to-face conversation, your friend said, well, that's good for you, but I don't think that has anything to do with me. When they go away and you pray, there can be a point where their heart is changed. And I don't think people come to faith without the Lord doing a work in them. And when they do, and that can happen to some pretty nasty looking people, because we've seen it, Saul was one of them, who are very anti-Christian, very anti-church, and suddenly it all changes. And that conversation they had with you 3 years ago can suddenly come to their mind, and everything changes. Yeah. Liz.
So you said we're an intertwined ligament of our body, mind, and soul, and our mind and soul come from God who created us, and here's the one who gives us our thoughts. So
I didn't say he gives us our thoughts.
well, I was going to say how or who gives us the bad sinful thoughts.
He's not doing your thinking. David wrote, you know my thoughts before I think them, but he's not saying you're the one who's thinking them. He's saying, you're right here. I can't hide from you. As I'm formulating my thought and trying to give it words, you know the thought. And you're saying, wait for the words. Okay, now you got it. Those are the words. So he is in there with you. There's no place you can go to hide from God. When you're thinking, he's right in that space. He's he's observing you think, okay? But he's not doing your thinking. So when you sin, he's observing your thought. And when a person goes and does something evil, like drive a car into a crowded street on Bourbon Street, okay, and they're thinking something, does God allow even wicked acts to move into the motor cortex and allow the human to grab the gun and shoot the school or drive into Bourbon Street? He can stop it at any point. But for his greater purposes, and here we go into very deep questions about the problem of evil and what is God accomplishing here on planet Earth, he often allows that evil act to play out by the human body. So he moves that. You've intended to grab the gun, here's the gun. Now I know, you might know times when he's intervened. I know a guy who had a loaded pistol and put it to his head and pulled the trigger, and the bullet lodged in the barrel. And he thought, this is weird. I've never heard of this happening before. But he put the gun down, and then he went to Scripture, and he said, I think there's something I'm supposed to do. He texted me not long ago. I know the guy. So there are these things that happen. I know multiple stories like this. I also know the stories where someone was killed because someone was an evil actor, and they took their life. And so that goes to deep, deep questions about the problem of evil. In my view, if an atheist uses that for a reason to not believe in God, and it's maybe the most popular, is if God's all-powerful and good, then there shouldn't be any evil in the world. And that's not a good argument, but it's a good space for starting a conversation. Because if you care about evil, let's have a conversation about evil. Because if God's not there, then how are you even talking about evil? What is evil if God's not there? Just something you don't like? Well, Hitler didn't like Jews. So, I mean, you have a hard time constructing a notion of evil that has any teeth to it. You can't do it from an atheistic perspective. So I think when atheists go that way, you push back and say, okay, you seem to care about evil, so do I. What is evil if God's not there? And then it's going to lead you to the cross, because the cross is where the most beautifully merciful act ever coincides with the most evil act ever. As if God is capable of taking the worst of the worst and bringing the best of the best out of it. That's the cross. And I think ultimately when you have these conversations about the problem of evil, it goes to the cross. Yes, there's human suffering. God the Father did not spare suffering for God the Son, and God the Son walked into it. So it's real and it's important, but it's pointing you to something that's even more important than your concerns about your own suffering. Yeah? We'll end with that? Okay.